I have a number of videos on my channel where I talk about fake Disney pins and go over some ways to identify them. But for today's video, I wanted to share my step-by-step process that I use when anybody asks me for help with whether a pin is fake or not, and when I'm trying to authenticate my own pins. A lot of people who are brand new to the hobby will ask for, well, what are the ways where you can identify a fake Disney pin? And unfortunately, there's no cookie cutter way or easy recipe that can actually be applied to identifying fake pins. So that's why this video is going to be a little bit more about the process that I go through, since there are no uniform rules or ways to identify fake Disney pins. And also it's important to keep in mind that it's kind of a bit of a steep learning curve with getting an eye for identifying fake pins, but once you kind of have that eye for what to look for and what pins are faked, it becomes far easier making educated guesses about authenticity. And also at one point, I myself knew absolutely nothing about fake pins. So hopefully a video like this will be an important step in the education process. Now before even going over anything specifically that should be looked for on a pin, when somebody asks me the question, is my pin fake? The first question that I look to answer is, has this pin even been faked? I know that fake pins can kind of feel very pervasive, and sometimes it just seems like there is everywhere and so many of them, but the vast majority of Disney pins have not been faked. There are tens of thousands of different Disney pins, and it really is only a small fraction of those pins that have counterfeits that exist. There are certain pins that are more likely to be faked, like hidden Mickeys or simple pins, but any type of Disney pin can be faked. But so the first question that you actually want to answer when you're trying to figure out is my pin fake is, has this pin been faked? I'd say for the majority of the times that people contact me asking for authenticity help, it actually ends right here with this step, because the answer will be no, this pin has not been faked. So all of them should absolutely be safe. So how do you know whether or not a pin has been faked? If the pin is at least a few years old, I'll typically start by going to pinpicks.com. Pinpicks.com is a database of pretty much every single Disney pin in existence. It's also a catalog of pins and gives information about the pins. And for a number of older pins, they'll have a scrapper warning or counterfeit warning section, which sometimes will state if a pin has been faked. Now, at some point, PinPix seems to have switched their scrapper warning page to a counterfeit warning page, and a lot of those warnings were lost in the process. So really, I will typically only find useful counterfeit warnings on PinPix if the pin is at least a few years old. Sometimes it'll just give a warning that this pin has been found from counterfeit sellers on eBay, and other times it'll give very specific useful information about what to look for on the fake pins and what differentiates a fake pin from an authentic one. But if you don't find a counterfeit warning for a pin on PinPix, that does not mean that it hasn't been faked. So in all, out of all the Disney pins, there are comparatively few that have been faked. And on PinPix, of those fake pins, there are actually pretty few that have explicit warnings. But if there is a warning, that's at least a concrete way of saying, okay, yes, there are fakes of this pin that do exist. The next thing I do after checking PinPix is I go on eBay and I look for the pin. I've talked about in videos how to have a safe buying experience on eBay, but I don't just use eBay as a place to buy pins, I also use it as kind of an education resource. So the first thing that you want to look for on eBay is if you see this pin in multiple listings coming from sellers in Hong Kong for 50-cent shipping. These are the direct counterfeit sellers, and all the pins that you see from these sellers are ones that currently are being faked. So I'll typically try and find these listings by sorting from lowest to highest list price, since like I said, these are being sold from super cheap from Hong Kong and for only 50-cent shipping. So you'll find all sorts of different pins coming from these counterfeit sellers, from hidden Mickey pins to Walt Disney Imagineering pins. And if you're finding listings that look like these, typically the listing will have an R number or an N number at the end of it. You'll see numerous different ones repeated, some in auction, some in buy it now. And that's the next most concrete way you know a pin has been faked. But from those sellers, those are really more of the pins that are currently being faked. And so you do also want to look among other eBay sellers with who has them. I'd probably recommend my video about my guide to buying Disney pins online for familiarizing yourself with what some of the bad things are to look for with eBay sellers. People who have marketed the pins as tradable, or that all pins were traded with cast members in the parks. Those are typically terminology used by counterfeit sellers. If you see that they have very low limited edition pins in very high quantities for very cheap, that's typically an indicator. And also another thing that you can just do is ask in one of the pin groups is, has this pin been faked? Because if the answer is no, then you don't have to worry about any of the other steps. This definitely helps with the pin paranoia that a lot of people kind of feel when they're newer into collecting. I've lost count of the number of times I've seen where people will buy a pin on eBay that was released in the parks 2 weeks ago and they ask, is this pin fake? And that's a super easy one because no, it was just released 2 weeks ago. It's brand new. Sometimes there can be a quick turnaround time for fake pins. If Disney has some weird delay with releasing it, sometimes a fake can come up before the real ones, such as the case with the Windows of Evil pins. But I don't think that this point is stressed enough in first yourself trying to figure out is, has this pin even been faked? Alright, but so then say you've done this first step and you have been able to determine, yes, this pin has been faked. As a general first and foremost applicable to all pins, you ideally want to have a comparison to a guaranteed authentic pin. And as I've said before, the only way to 100% guarantee the authenticity of a pin is if it has been purchased directly from Disney. So then what I always try to do is, if I'm not familiar with a pin, find a picture of the pin that I know is authentic. For current pins, you can do that by looking on the Shop Disney Parks app. You can also ask online if anybody has a guaranteed authentic version of the pin. And a lot of times for me, I've seen so many pins that I kind of know the baseline of what to look for with a lot of them. So I find it's always helpful to familiarize yourself and kind of get a baseline to train your eye of what you should look for in a pin. But then the next question I typically ask is, where did this pin come from? How did you get this pin? And if the answer is something like, I purchased it directly from the Disney parks or the Shop Disney website, then again, that's totally good. That is the one way to know you have an authentic pin. If the answer is, well, I purchased a cheap pin lot on eBay, Amazon, and Etsy, then that's also an easy answer because 100% of those pins are counterfeits. If you purchase a very cheap, as in $1 or less per pin lot from eBay, Amazon, and Etsy, and the pins come in these very thin little plastic baggies with a red line on top, there is a 100% chance that 100% of the pins are fake. These are exactly how the pins come from the counterfeit factories in China. So basically, whenever you see a pin that comes in baggies like this, that is an absolute warning sign, because the only way you can get these little baggies are through the counterfeit pin lots. It's kind of frustrating with these pin lots because some people will think, oh, you know, some of the pins in there were fake, but if we got a few real ones. But no, these pin lots are 100% fake pins. So if I see somebody who's posted asking for authenticity help and all the pins are in these little baggies, it's a very quick, immediate answer of, yes, they're all fake, but I am gonna go through some of the ways where you can actually tell that they're all fake. The next possible answer in where did you get this pin is, well, I traded it with a cast member at Disney. Unfortunately, at least 95% of the pins that are on cast member lanyards and pin boards in the parks are counterfeit pins because they're all coming from these fake pin lots on eBay and Amazon. So yes, you can find authentic pins from cast member trades in the parks, but that's actually very difficult to do. So if somebody says, yeah, I traded it with a cast member, but then that's kind of when you need to go a little bit further and look at all the signs. Then there are more open-ended possibilities, like I purchased it online. If it's purchased from eBay, I do have my video again talking about safely buying pins online. And I talk explicitly about some safe sellers and also some general things about what a lot of counterfeit sellers say. So that's a little less cut and dry on its own. And then there's the other possibility of, well, somebody gifted this pin to me. So let's say that now you've been able to confirm that, yes, this pin has been faked, and yes, it is coming from a suspect source. So where in the world do you begin with what to look for? So first, I'm going to talk about hidden Mickey pins and the pins that you'll find in these pin lots. Since with these, it's definitely a little bit more cut and dry. Hidden Mickey pins, I would say, have the strictest or most explicit rules when identifying fakes, but still different pins will have different indicators of being fake. Before I even show any specific examples with pins, I first wanted to say that the magnet test does not work. That is a myth that a lot of people say and think that if you stick a magnet to a pin and it sticks, then it's fake, a real one won't stick, and that just does not work for pins. It all depends on the type of metal that the pin is made of. There are plenty of real pins that will stick to magnets. There are fake pins that won't stick to magnets. And it seems like, oh, it'd be great if the magnet test would work, because again, that's something super simple and easy. But what I kind of want this video to emphasize is that identifying fake pins is unfortunately not a cut and dry thing. So here I have two authentic hidden Mickey pins. And something that I think is most helpful is getting a baseline eye for what the real deal should look like. This is a relatively recent Disneyland hidden Mickey featuring some awesome churros. So with hidden Mickeys, you want to make sure that that Mickey head is nice and defined. Mickey should not be looking like a sad little blob. This pin here has a nice even paint fill, and you'll notice that this pin actually has screen printed elements on it. Cheap fake pins are pretty much always missing screen printed detailing, and so this can be a useful indicator for certain pins. Fakes don't have screen printing, they're all enamel there. So with hidden Mickey pins, the back is oftentimes the most useful thing to look at. It's not always the case with pins, but with hidden Mickeys it's a little bit more cut and dry. For the newer ones that have the Mickey waffle pattern on the back, you want to make sure that it looks nice and smooth and goes all the way to the edges. You want to make sure that all the text on the pin is very legible and nice and defined. Something else you want to look for is very clear, distinct spacing between the number on there. You also want to make sure there are nice, sharp, very prominent nubs on the pin. This one here is an older hidden Mickey pin. And really when you get a hold of an authentic version, you can just so clearly see the difference. All the lines on this pin are super nice and clearly defined, very nicely shaped Mickey head, nice paint job all around. And so this is a pin with a sandblasted back on it. So this was before they switched to the waffle pattern. But again, you want to make sure that everything is super nice and legible. You want to make sure, again, you have very clear, distinct spacing between your number. And again, you want to make sure you have very nice, sharp, clearly defined nubs. Okay, so now we have this hidden Mickey pin, and just looking off the front, what do you think? You can see the Mickey head is actually pretty nicely defined there. The colorings look perhaps a little bit weird, but it's hard to tell without having an authentic one for comparison. However, if we turn this one over to the back, you'll see that it is very noticeable what this pin is lacking. First off, you can see that this pin has a very large border with the Mickey heads where they don't go smoothly to the edges. I want to very strongly emphasize that this border rule only applies to hidden Mickey pins. All other pins is a case-by-case basis, but hidden Mickeys, it is, as of now, a rule where you see the border, you know that pin is fake. You'll also notice that this pin is totally missing nubs. It has no nubs on there. The spacing between the numbers actually isn't too bad, and the legibility isn't too bad, but it's got a knockdown with the border and no nubs. We have this Oswald hidden Mickey here, and you can see it's got some pretty bad flaws on it. But it could be hard to tell, well, maybe that pin got scratched up by something. It does have a relatively nicely defined Mickey head, but again, we turn it to the back of the pin, and with this one, you'll notice it doesn't actually have a border to it. The legibility in the pin trading logo is a little difficult. The spacing between the numbers isn't too bad, but with this pin, the indication is that the nubs are almost non-existent. They're like barely even there. They're like little nublets. And so compare that to this pin, which is authentic, and you can see how sharp the nubs should be. Another thing is all authentic hidden Mickeys, which both of these are authentic, are all going to be made of hard enamel. So there's a difference between hard enamel pins and soft enamel. A lot of the cheap fake pins are made with soft enamel because it is much cheaper. Soft enamel has a very wet, dipped look. It's not level and doesn't fill to the lines of the pin. There are some authentic Disney pins that are made with a more soft enamel style, and they'll usually have a nice glossy epoxy top coat. So you want to look for a nice regular smooth enamel fill. So this is beyond hidden Mickey pins, but still the type of pins you'll find in a lot of the fake pin lots. This pin again from the front doesn't look too bad. I mean, Minnie looks a little bit wonky. There's some bad looking stuff going on with the paint there, but you'll see the back looks very bad. You can barely even make out what any of this text says. Limited edition of 500 is all smashed in together. And to know this, you'd need to have a comparison to an authentic, but you'll see that this pin has a border, and I know that this authentic pin should not have a border. All right, so this pin is an example of you have to know what you're looking for to be able to tell that this is fake. So this is a Dumbo donut pin. The enamel on the front does not really look good. It's super scratchy, but again, a lot of authentic Disney pins are kind of coming out with scratchy enamel. We turn it over to the back. Printing is alright, you can kind of read it. The nubs are kind of there. They may be a little bit smaller than normal, but because I know what the authentic baseline should be, the authentic ones have horizontal Mickey heads going on it, and this one has vertical Mickey heads. So for this series of donut mystery pins, when I see the vertical Mickey heads, I know that is a fake. That's why I stress that it's important to become familiar with a baseline of what the authentic ones should look for. So just by looking off the back of this pin, what would you guess about its authenticity? You can see there's lots of weird bubbles around, the heads are weird there, it has borders all the way around, but it does have some nice sharp nubs. This pin is actually an authentic real pin that I got direct from Disney for staying at Disneyland. This is a pin where if you don't know what it looks like and you get this, you could possibly think that it's fake, just based on how bad that border looks around the back. That's why assessing a pin's authenticity really has to be holistic. You have to look over all the components of the pin, and this is why it's difficult because you have to know what you're looking for. So if the pin is a hidden Mickey style or one that you'll often find in pin lots, then you really need to have more of a baseline of what the actual pin is supposed to look like. Is your real pin supposed to have nubs, and how many? Does the real pin have a border or doesn't it? Does the back of the authentic pin look junky or should it be really nice and clean? Unfortunately, Disney further makes things difficult because a lot of authentic pins from the parks are kind of flawed and pretty low in quality. So it's important to note that a minor flaw on the pin does not mean that it is fake. I want to share a few examples of some open edition and limited edition pins I have to also help train your eye of some things to look for and also show again how complicated it can be in determining authenticity. Here's a few more examples of what to tune your eye to look for with authentic pins. More recent pins will have some form of an FAC or factory number on it. Sometimes it starts with FAC, sometimes it starts with N, but some of the pins have it screen printed or lasered on the pin. Most of the time when you see this is a very good indicator of authenticity. When the FAC isn't actually stamped into the metal, there will be a lot of fake pins that won't have the screen printed number on it. However, a lot of the fake Walt Disney Imagineering and Disney Studio Store Hollywood pins do actually have the screen printed numbers on them. So again, something that makes it difficult. Generally, when you see that number on there, that's a really good sign, but sometimes it won't mean anything. I wanted to give an example of a stained glass pin because a lot of times people will see stained glass and see things as signs for being fake. So you can see there are actually some errors with this pin here, but this is an authentic pin directly from Disney. So you need to be able to sort difference between little quality control and actual problems. But just about all stained glass pins will have very, very large prominent borders around the pin. So you can see the Mickey heads do not at all go smoothly to the edge, and there's borders all around the stained glass portion, and that's supposed to be there because they have to do that to get the stained glass in there. So if you see a back like this with a stained glass element, don't be concerned. This pin is an example of one from the Disney Studio Store Hollywood. It is an authentic pin, and you'll notice that this has borders along the edge. The border rule, like I mentioned, does not at all apply to pins from the Studio Store or Walt Disney Imagineering pins. They have a much more complicated back stamp, so you'll see a lot of their pins do come with these borders, and the back waffle pattern is far less helpful than it is for the other types of pins. For some of the very heavily faked Studio Store pins, you'll notice that there is a dividing line between the base of the ice cream and the top. A lot of the fake pins are actually missing that. So that's at least one indicator that you can look for with the pins with the ice cream backs. If you see it's missing that dividing line, that means it's probably fake. But otherwise, for pins like these, like I said, you really need to have a comparison of what it's supposed to look like. I wanted to give an example of the Disneyland Paris Pin Trading Night pin because these pins are some of the most heavily faked limited edition pins. This one is a Zootopia pin, which actually has not been faked. So this is what a normal one should look like. It's going to have very nice clear defined lines, and both of the park icons should be very nice and clearly defined. It's got a very nice sharp nub on it. All the printing on the back is very nice. And you'll notice this is nice for the Paris limited edition pins. It has a specific edition number. So that's helpful, except it seems like the newer wave of counterfeit pin trading night pins do have fake versions of that number on there. But if you see that it's missing that number, that's a pretty good indication of it being fake. So I wish there could be a video where it's like you check all of these boxes, and if you check them, then yes, your pin is fake. But you really have to be able to assess multiple aspects of the pin and be familiar enough with having a baseline comparison of what to look for. So at least in general, most applicable to hidden Mickey pins and the pins from the bulk lots. With those, you're looking for a nice clean back on the pin. If the pin has nubs, nice and prominent, clear spacing, no wet or dippy looking enamel. And so that's the part where it takes that extra step of self-education, and you can't expect it to happen overnight where you just immediately can tell all the signs of it being fake. Also much easier when you actually have the pin in your hand. You can actually feel the weight of it. But I definitely recommend following the process of first actually confirming that the pin has been faked, determining where it came from, and then going from there. So I do hope this has been a somewhat helpful guide in the steps to go through and the things to look for when you're trying to authenticate pins. And again, everything is a guideline. There really aren't hard and fast rules. You need to be able to train your eye for the things to look for, since it can be so different among pins. And you really want to familiarize yourself with what pins have been faked. And if you're absolutely super incredibly concerned about the authenticity of your pins, the way to ensure that is to buy them direct from Disney. That's of course not always going to be possible, but with time, hopefully navigating the pin waters should become easier. If you have any other general questions about this subject, I'm happy to answer them in the comments. But thanks for watching!